So yesterday I talked about, because you were all here yesterday I talked about a before picture and an after picture, remember? Well, guess what? History repeats itself. And you can see in the morning session I was sort of gaining an idea of what was wrong, what was wrong, and what was wrong, and then I had my aha moment. In German, das Aha-Erlebnis. That's it. So that's the what moment, actually, basically in English. I think that's a better way of putting it. And this is what happened afterwards. And what happened afterwards is partially a reality moment of, as Miles and I were discussing earlier, what a university expects us to produce because we have a certain contract, as opposed to what we think is essential in our field. Now, I don't have what the university thinks I should produce, but the UK has the Research Excellence Framework, which is the most nerve-wracking, every 5 to 6 years experience of Las Vegas, that you think it's a fair competition of the quality of research, but who are these experts to say what is of international importance and impact? Because they have their preferences and everything else, so you can never get it right. But that's not what this is about. So working at the cutting edge, well, it seems if that's what you want to do in your music, then you might want to do that in your scholarship as well. And the foundation of, and now I'm being very specific, electroacoustic music studies. You'll see those 3 words in succession coming back later on. I came up with that phrase, not that there's anything special about it, because in English, musicology has become a kind of a bad word, because musicologists don't give up about this music, don't talk to new music people to see if there's a commonality of musicology and so on. And so I called it electroacoustic music studies, which people on the continent agreed with. So EMS will come back. Barry Truax, who we mentioned yesterday, has said that any area that calls itself studies doesn't know what it is yet. So maybe that's true too. And in fact, in electroacoustic music studies, it sort of doesn't, because curricula vary a lot from how-to courses to whatever else there is. but also, it's very interesting to see what scholarship has been produced, and even more interesting to discover what kinds of scholarship has not been introduced. And most of that scholarship, I think, is at the foundation and not at the cutting edge. So you can get umpteen history books about this stuff, all of them having different opinions about who was important, et cetera, and they're very valuable and you can't live without them. But as you will see in this talk, there are a couple of foundational things I've done that then get linked to reaching out, like that second book. And this is now how I practice what I started preaching with that one talk at ICMC. So as always, here's a structure. So the things that I've considered foci of what I've done and what I've achieved, and then I split that up into 3 publishing, and I just focus on the books because the books take you to most of the places where I've been going. Professional citizenship, you remember I used that word yesterday. I learned it from US universities, and it's stuff that you do above and beyond because you feel obligated, but you equally want to serve various communities to support the field that you've chosen. And by the way, you've got a salary, or I have a salary, as somebody in the education field, higher education field. And so I think it's my obligation on the basis of having that position to engage in what I call professional citizenship, and I will illustrate that on that slide. And then there's outreach, which for me, as I said before the break, I went to the UK because of the community arts that they were doing, and that outreach has become enormously important. Because as that gentleman was asking me, what do you want the musicians to do who aren't doing anything about this? Well, I'll show you. So this is a very busy slide, but I do want to walk through these line by line because there are things that it's not so much the article or the term itself, but it's the implications of having done these things. And some of them are cutting edge research because nobody else has done it, and I think it's furthering the theory or the cultural studies or the whatever of the field. And other things are foundational because there were bits of a foundation that were missing. For example, a 2007 book I'm going to talk about called Understanding the Art of Sound Organization, which if I had to choose a book as being the most important that I've written, that would be the one, because no one had ever taken a survey of all the theoretical writings in the field and presented them at once. History's okay. New ideas, the bases. You've all taken theory courses. So what's the theory course of electroacoustic music? It's going to be a random selection of a couple of things, and there aren't that many. So there are some that are missing. And that book attempts to identify where those holes are, as well as introduce the things. So Dennis Smalley came up in one of the classes of Theo's this week, and to get through Smalley, there are about 7 articles of about 12, 15 pages each, and that's a lot to take in, but I just summarized all of them in about 6 pages, because that's how many he deserved, and then people can get introduced to Dennis Smalley and then move on to the next one who did other stuff. So yeah, I did things because nobody else did. The something to hold on to factor in timbral music was a talk that I gave at City University in London, where Professor Simon Emerson was working at the time. Simon was here, how many years ago, Theo? 5 years ago. But between then and now, Simon Emerson moved from London to De Montfort University, and he's one of my best friends. And working together with one of your best friends is not a bad deal. Not a bad deal. And we were eventually to do research projects together. So he invited me to this thing, and I thought, oh, what can I offer? And then I did something that was fairly horrendous. I listened, and I think I alluded to it already. I listened to 180 CDs of electroacoustic music. That was a long haul. And I listened to each piece, ignoring the program notes a little bit, although sometimes I would look them up for a particular reason, to find out what are the things I'm listening to that if I had little to no experience in this music, I could latch on to as a navigation device. Just like a child trying to identify something that's probably not there, but they want to link on to something somehow. And so I came up with a list of things, and the list was fairly short. An example would be a composer who uses sounds or sound types that are fairly consistent with each other. So there's a limited supply, and they all have some kind of link to each other. Another one, which I actually discussed with Dennis Smalley, was not to have more than X layers of sound at a given moment, because when you go beyond X, you can't follow them anymore, and you're in the soup of sound. And he said he never goes beyond 4 or 5, which is exactly what I'd already written without having analyzed it fully. And there's a guy who's really aware of what he's doing all the time. The use of the voice is like a magnet. You hear a voice, and then the other stuff becomes of secondary importance, because that's how we communicate. And there were other things like that. And there weren't that many, as I said. And fortunately, this is a project that's gone on. There have been PhD students of mine and other people in other countries who have done work. They did it with audiovisual works, or they just found other items to add to the list, because that was just the first stab. But it was also interesting to note how many composers, when they write liner notes, don't absolutely address this at all. They don't care to share any of that. And that is probably the primary reason why the public is so small. Because if there's nothing to hold on to, how are they going to find their way in? Unless you're a pure masochist who loves to get lost, loves to get confused, and really appreciates that moment. I don't know anybody who likes that, but you know. It's not going to work. And so there's another way of not addressing how to communicate with your public. Very simple concept. Well, because there's no theory in electroacoustic music. The something to hold on to factor's probably been cited 1,000 times. No joke. Because it's one of the few things that people have described and people get. And the something to hold on to is relevant to the listener, but is it also a wake-up moment for the composer to think about these things when you're making works? Because then you're deciding how you're addressing people. Obviously, familiarity with sound source is number one on the list. And this is linked to the fact, and I believe I said that yesterday. If I did, I apologize, because I'm at that age where I start repeating myself. As a student, you learn the what a piece is intended to achieve and how you did it, but I wasn't asked why I did it, which was the whole dramaturgy story yesterday, right? And for whom? Because we're always assuming we're writing for everybody. Well, no, we're not. I mean, one opportunity students have when they're making this stuff, and Hoyne has done it. Hoyne has done it. He's addressed a certain age group, and anybody else who likes a heavy beated stuff. But that is taking the very known into a slightly unknown, both in image and in sound. Good for him. Because he knows he's got a potential public that's used to a certain thing and seeing it develop further. I think that's a strong thing to do. And I hope you agree. Great. The intention reception project was something, idealism. I asked all of my new colleagues, because we were just forming the Institute at the time, whether they wanted to join in, and I will say, yeah. And then it was, I have no time, I have no time, I have no time. And I got a scholarship, and a PhD student who was wondrously fantastic, and we did this project together. And the idea between the intention reception project was twofold. The first thing was, if a composer has a communicative intention in an electroacoustic music piece, to what extent is it coming across, and how valuable is that? Now, the key thing about this project was we played music to people who'd never heard it, people who were starting a music study but didn't know about electroacoustic music, and those in the know. So they were either specializing in or were experts in. 3 groups, 2 inexperienced, 1 experienced. All clear? The second intention was, and that turned out for me personally to be more important, for the inexperienced groups, when presented with the music in an intelligent manner, whatever that means, how many people listening to electroacoustic, probably for the first time, or at least consciously for the first time, would like to engage with it again? So if I just did a round, I'm not going to waste your time, but if you just thought, okay, nobody knows this stuff, what percentage of people when getting introduced to this stuff will say they want to hear it again? And I said, if we get 20%, that's damn good. 20% of the South African population, about 13 million people that could really dig this stuff. Yeah, that's a lot of people, and that's just one country. This is how it worked. We would choose pieces where all of the source material was identifiable, some of it was identifiable, and just a tiny bit was identifiable. In no case did we use pieces where everything was unknown. Because we knew, that's not going to work. I could have done it, but I didn't see the point. The pieces were played to the students, or to the participants, I should say, with no information at all, just cold. And then they had a questionnaire. What sounds did you hear? Did anything happen to the sounds? How do you think the sounds were, made into a piece of music in a very general way, not loads of paragraphs? What do you think the piece might be about? What did you like about the piece? What did you not like about the piece? And then there was a question that turned out to be useless, 2 actually. Would you go to a concert of this stuff? Well, a lot of people never go to concerts, so that was a bad question. Would you buy a CD of this stuff? A lot of people didn't buy CDs at the time, because we're talking around 2000 and 2005. They didn't buy CDs, so that question was ridiculous. But the next one was good. Would you like to hear this piece again or something like it? Remember that one. Then something was said about the piece. Either a title or just something to hold on to about the piece. Played it again. All of these were short, by the way, because if it's 15 minutes, they're lost. Played it again. Second question here. What did you identify that you didn't hear before? What did you think was going on? Do you think you made a mistake the first time? Is there anything else you'd like to say? Then the program note was offered, but we had a composer intention form, and if there were good tidbits on that, we used that. Played it a third and final time, and the final questionnaire. Was that information helpful? And all sorts of other little questions. So the idea of listening to a piece 3 times is already, who does that? Well, how are you going to learn something about it? I just saw Merrill's piece for some of them second time, some of them third time, and every time I watch it, I get it more, I identify more, I discover more. So, back to the point. What were the percentage reactions? Would you like to hear this piece again? Or something like it from the inexperienced group. The worst statistic we've had, and this has been done not only at our university, by that student and by me, and there's a book chapter on it and a whole PhD dissertation. They did it in Malaysia. They've done it in Germany. They've done it in Scandinavia, and other people have done it in the UK. The worst statistic we've had was 59% of inexperienced people would like to hear something like this again. The best was around 80. Not bad. If you've done Beethoven, I don't know whether you would have gotten that high. I really don't. That's astonishing. I've sent this to governments, Ministry of Education, music directors around the globe. Look at this, and why don't you think about it? And that's really taken a big step from what I was talking about this morning, right? I would make editorial contributions to the journal Organized Sound, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. So it's a journal that I co-founded with 3 people, and now I'm the editor. It's 30 years old. I'm doing this for 30 years, and sometimes I would write editorials about the state of musicology and where there's holes in the market and where we're maybe overly investing in some things, etc., just to try to stimulate debate and so on. In 2007, when we're going to get to the books in a moment, I came up with a term that I mentioned this morning briefly with that horribly overused word, the sound-based music paradigm. Paradigm means a body of knowledge that is somehow consistent to itself. We don't go beyond that. There's a philosophical views on the word paradigm, but there's information concerning the production, appreciation, and knowledge related to making music with sounds that fits together. Even though a noise composition, a soundscape composition, and some of the stuff we just heard in a concert don't sound at all alike. But there's something that overlaps with, in a healthy manner, with note-based music, and there are other things that are distinctively different from, not least in the production and the technology. And that concept would form the basis of that, I think, most important book that I ever wrote. There's been a lot of work in electroacoustic music analysis, which forms part of the scholarship of electroacoustic music, but I then stress from the listener's point of view. There is a term that is known in the field of musicology called critical musicology, where they were debating things that had always been thus and looking for alternatives. And one of the many alternatives with which I fully agreed was that music analysis was mainly score-based. Score-based. If we're dealing with music without a score, different situation. That could be jazz, that could be traditional South African music that has never known a score, and why should it? Then you have to do something else. But analysis is based on that thing, mainly. And my point of view, and that's agreed by Simon Emerson, who really is one of the top thinkers in the field, is the listening experience is how to investigate how we're relating to it, what we discover in a score, how we relate to score, and if you use some kind of visual representation as a support of the sound and the sound in space, that's very helpful. So that's an area I've spent a lot of time on. Simon and I had an enormous research grant to do it. That analysis came out of it, the software, and I'm very proud of that. I'm really proud of that. Now, yesterday I talked a lot about sampling because I didn't quite know that was what I was doing, and then I did know that I was doing, and last night you heard nothing but that. And tonight, again, sorry. So I got invited to that thing. I told you about it yesterday, so I'm not going to hang on this one. The Leigh conference in Berlin at the Academy of Arts, very, very memorable event. But they'd noticed this in me, and I hadn't. And so I was, like this figure in sampling. Oh, okay, I guess I am. And now I'm aware of it, and it's a driving force, and obviously I write a lot about that. And things related to music and culture. Now that you can have to split up, because the place of electroacoustic music in culture and why it's not landing and all that other kind of stuff that we already started in the last talk, that's one line of thought. But the thought of music and culture, which I'm going to stop at for a second. I wrote an article about the 3 pathways in Chinese electroacoustic music. Now, why the hell did I write about Chinese electroacoustic music? Answer, I've been there about 10 times. And I kind of know what's going on. I also know in the Chinese education system, with thank the Lord you don't have, because everything is dictated from above what you do, and the freedom for you to decide what you're doing in the next composition equals 0. But through that system, it was very interesting to note that those in conservatoires and those who were in the underground of Chinese art, which is hard to get to, but once you get in there, there's a very hot bath to enter of really interesting stuff. And they had things in common, even though they don't talk to each other. As a matter of fact, one is jealous of the other, one gets in trouble politically, the other one is, run politically, and it's a completely strange dual cultural situation that they have. Nonetheless, 3 pathways. Music inspired by Chinese culture in all of its facets, whether we're talking about Confucius, the famous poet Li Po, or anything, Taoism, Buddhism, whatever, that's inspired many a Chinese electroacoustic composition. May sound strange, but why not? Other ones are inspired by Chinese instrumental and vocal tradition. So take that whole piece of mine yesterday, and that kind of stuff influences them. And they all, at conservatoire, they all have to do a mixed music piece with traditional Chinese instruments. So it's obligation as well for them, not for the underground musicians, who don't tend to do it as much. The third one, sampling Chinese music. And those tend to be, of the 3, the most radical. Underground, there's a lot of conceptual work, which is more about thought turning into sound. That could be a little bit more opaque, but at least as interesting. And it's a highly cited article because the Chinese have never taken the trouble to actually investigate what they're doing. They're celebrating the professors. What an old-fashioned system with no freedom. It's really painful because there's a lot of talent there. But the individual is almost erased by the time they get to higher education. They take the Gaokao, the famous exam to get into a university, where it's all rote learning. Learn, learn, learn. Is it the same in Korea, Wayne? I don't think so. Is it just memorize at school?
I don't know. I'm not really Korean, bro.
We'll leave it. Anyway, in China, that's how it is at the moment. But I wanted to stop at that point because you're in a country that begs for some kind of acknowledgement of one's own culture. Denise, I'm not going to single you out, am I now? Merrill, emancipation. That's got two levels of stuff going on there. There's the female part of it, which you also do, but that was not the prime point in that piece. And you had the African element of it, which is very subtle. With your backgrounds, your cultural diversity, your national history, the history of every component of South Africa, and I would more generalize this sub-Saharan Africa. Why not obligate, but invite dealing with one's culture? I've lived in 3 countries, so I could be seen as pretentious for what I did yesterday, or opportunistic, or just desirous to mold my way of doing things with Disu's way of doing things. You can tell me whether you think I did the right thing or the wrong thing, but not now. It was just so enjoyable to see that happen. But I'm maybe not the one to do it, you are. So it's just something to think about. I really think we in the northern bit don't consider that often enough. There are countries in Latin America, countries often are amongst them, where that is of relevance, and I think that's just great. For example, a lot of Latin American electroacoustic music has a beat, where a lot of European electroacoustic music and North American avoids it like the plague, because that was one of the things we were trying to discover outside of the known in the new music of the 20th century. Well, we don't have to not do it. We can do both, and they do, and I think that's great. Yeah, there are food for thought related publications. I'm not going to really talk much about that other than to say that I sometimes write provocative publications, which by now should not surprise you since you've been listening to me for 2 days and I have not been going out of my way to bore you with facts. So you can imagine my doing that. And every once in a while, despite the fact that I don't have all those CDs and my name is not that well known, I do get invited to write something about my own works. So there were 2 years of I can't believe it, this being one of them. But the other one was 2007, where the 2 books in the middle came out within a week.
Oh.
The one on the right was written after the one on the left, but the publisher on the right was smaller than MIT. They took a year to get that thing out. And so this week, in which we had an Electroacoustic Music Studies International Gathering at my own university, was a double book launch. Woo, that was fun. But let's take them from the left. Do you remember the checker? You say checkers or you say drafts here? Checkers. Yeah. Do you remember the one we saw yesterday on the video? That's a company that I co-direct called ED Feeks, as I mentioned yesterday. And Evelyn, the choreographic and artistic director, so co-director with me and I, were invited to do a book with a video. And then that wonderful publisher I was working with for the first 2 books crashed, and I had to find somebody else to do it. So they put out, like, I don't know, 1,000 copies of this, and it cost them so much to put them together, and it was such a pain. They gave me the rights back, so it's all on my website, and you can get the videos and book free. And it's about collaborative devising. In other words, although we're both artistic directors, once we have the people involved, everybody makes it together. You know, somebody has to steer in case of a conflict, but it is collectively, collaboratively made. That's a political approach. You have all sorts of collaborations, from fully led, the Hollywood director, or the theater director, or even the conductor of an orchestra, to devised, which is collective. And what a great way to make art, and by the way, what a statement about our society it is. Look at the great things we can make without having to be told what to do. So in that book we introduced what the company's done, because we were asked to do so, And we talk about how to devise, so there's a devising template in it. And if you would like to try this stuff, I recommend looking at the appendices where they're listed. Understanding the Art of Sound Organization, I mentioned twice or three times now, was that survey of the theoretical writings in the field, and an attempt to structure the field so that we know what its basic components are. So although cutting-edge research was in it, it was foundational, just putting these things next to each other for the first time. Chapter 1 is the Intention Reception Project, to make people aware of the fact that we need to take into account that this is growing like mad, but in audiences isn't. The number of people making it is, but the audience isn't. So isn't there something wrong here? It's on curricula of a hell of a lot of places. I was asked by a colleague at the Sorbonne to do a bilingual book, La musique des sons, or the music of sounds, in which the other one turned into a manifesto. So it's much more rhetoric, but I also, in all of the categories that came up in the MIT book, I took an artist or groups and I discussed some of their work to identify the richness and diversity of it, to then match it to what I'd written in the theoretical thing. So they're kind of like a companion. And it's kind of a shame that's a small publisher, because I'm just wondering whether I should just put that one on my website as well. But the next one, so that's book number 6, Making Music with Sounds, is going to come back in another guise in a few minutes. That takes me back to book number 2, that experimental notebooks that was made for teachers and anybody interested. This is not a how to do this, do that, do that, do that, and do that in 45 minutes, because I don't know if what do you call it, public school, state school here, whether their classroom has enough kit to do X, Y, and Z, and I don't know how much time they have, and I don't know how the teacher is going to pull this off, whereas in another school it's going to be easy peasy. So I leave it flexible, and I just give ways into kids making music with sounds. But that book happened while I was creating a website, and please allow me a few minutes to come back to it. The next one is an ebook, and it won't surprise you that I got invited to write a book about text sound composition. And I just decided I'm going to do something silly. Because it had to be short, that's what the publisher was publishing. And I did an A to Z, with each letter being an approach to having fun with words and vocal utterances. It was on sites like Amazon, etc., but I'm putting it on the website because the publisher never paid me back for my bid. And so I figured, well, what the hell, then why should he sell anymore? So pretty soon that'll be on my website. Expanding the Horizon of Electroacoustic Music Analysis is by no means foundational. That is a serious music analysis book that came out of that same project with Simon Emerson, as did E-Analysis. And there was even a website for people analyzing electroacoustic music to kind of communicate with each other. It was a kind of a community hub. You know, idealistic, but why not? Well, then there was 2024, as in now. So the Christmas present, but it says 2024, is a book called Experiencing Organized Sound. And I very, very consciously wrote it for people that know nothing about this stuff and people who know a lot about this stuff. And to celebrate my institute, while I wrote this, the financial crisis hit the UK, and they made people redundant, and I lost half my job, as did the other professors. Very ugly story. But to celebrate being together for 20 years or 25 years, because it came out when it was 25, I did a portrait of every staff member and a number of postgrads and graduates, so there's an international diaspora of people from us by now. Each example being entirely different from the other. So it ranges from a very strict French type acousmatic composition to sound synthesis with all sorts of algorithms that you'll never be able to hear, to silly me with my radio piece. In fact, it's the one I'm going to do, that you're going to hear tonight. Live art, all sorts of audio-visual approaches, sound installation, and just what the listening experience is. And I had a hidden agenda, not so hidden really, in the book, that the idea of going to concerts or going to art events, it seems to be slipping away. Pop festivals seem to be doing okay, but I don't know, these other things, there are fewer gigs and there are not that many people and something. But the fact of the matter is, listening to that lunch concert, especially the multi-channel pieces, on this sound system, in this room, the ceiling accepted and the air conditioning accepted, is really special. And looking at people's faces as they're really engaging with the piece and so on and so forth. When you do it on your headphones or you do it on your loudspeakers at home, it ain't the same. So why are we taking compressed stuff and listening to it all the time? Well, we're sitting in studios trying to make the best sounds we possibly can. There's something contradictory about it, unless that's what you want. And all the composers I spoke to, for various reasons, said the in situ experience of this piece is the way to do it. But you can also. So that's an overview of this stuff and a celebration of the joy, until recently, of starting an institute from scratch and then suddenly having 25 PhD students and 10 staff members and global partners, including UCT. I mean, it's just such a pleasure. Who says that after working in higher education for so many years? Then, I guess he didn't work with you guys, but you heard about him enough. John was here 2 months ago and did stuff at Disu's house and then put stuff on at that amazing cultural center, the name of which is not in my head. Can somebody help? The San Center.
Sun Heritage Center at Quatu.
Quatu. So they performed at Quatu with Disu's musicians and the two professors of these guys and John and people that had devised, DIY instruments and integrated circuit stuff for the performance. So the book is called The Music of Sounds and the Music of Things. And guess what? I'm the music of sounds, sampling. He's the music of things, hacking, DIY instrument design. And there's a message that I just want to share at this point from this book, because it's the end of the book, where we conclude with all the threatened forms of music, with the fact that folk music, if you say you're a folk musician in the UK, that means you play in folk clubs for money. Now, traditional music was never about money. It was about part of life. So if you become a professional artisan of folk music, can you really call yourself a folk musician? Well, I suppose you can, because that's all that's left, but that's not how it was. So what is today's folk music? Well, guess what? We're sitting at both Electrons, and I'm telling you sampling. And I'm telling you DIY instruments. Why? Everybody can do it, and maybe I'm sort of a master musician of the sample, as Disu is of the musical bow. But I'm happy to work with somebody who's never done it before, and I'm going to get something out of it in the collaboration. So there's a non-hierarchical but recognition of you've had more experience way of things. It's entirely democratic, largely illegal as well, but what the hell. And, it's fun. So why can't that be part of life? And hacking and making these instruments with stuff. I just loved it when Disu gave his professorial, because there were these harps and there was some kind of tin box that they were playing for resonance. And they'd hacked the box to make the harp, except they didn't use the word hack. They recycled the box because it makes the right resonance. Just like Disu on the Uhadi, I think it was, has the bottle caps that, that's the intensity factor that every kind of traditional African music has. He's got it in his new bows, yeah? Well, that's hacked bottle caps then, right? It's just a people's thing. And so after all of this survey of sampling and hacking and the collaboration in the workshop and stuff like that you expect from an academic book, there's your final thought. Music of the people. I enjoyed writing that. It's coming out in about a month, I think. Citizenship, very briefly. I've been mentoring tons of stuff. I've been editor, not lead, but part of a journal called Avant-Garde in the Netherlands where I used to work. I'm now with one called Art and Communication, which is a Chinese publication, because why not support other cultures that are developing something new? But the one that's taken up a hell of a lot of my life is that one on the left, because there's 3 issues a year. So we're coming out with the equivalent of about 360 pages and lots of media examples and going through the whole referee process, blah, 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 blah. But I'm serving the community by doing that. And I mentioned Electroacoustic Music Studies. Well, there's an Electroacoustic Music Studies network that has an annual conference and is the Global Subjects Association for this field of scholarship. And I founded it with Marc Battier, who at the time was at the Sorbonne, and he suggested we bring on Daniel Tarouji, who was the head of the GRM, not an unimportant place. And we started at IRCOM, believe it or not, the arch enemies worked together. And then it's been at my place twice, it's been in China a couple of times, it's been in Latin America, it's been everywhere. So it's like an ICMC. The difference between ICMC and this one, I'm looking at you, Miles, is that in the ICMC, if you got parallel sessions, it's almost never that you have any difficulty choosing where you're going to go. But when we put on parallel sessions, we get yelled at because people want to go to both. Why? Because this area is self-contained and everybody's interested in everybody else's work. It's a really, really gratifying, yet small venture. One of you 2 guys should host it one day. That would up the African game. He knows, you don't have to look at him, he knows, we're talking about it. We're also talking about an African issue of organized sound, which has never been, and it's long overdue. Let's go. Now, that's the last slide before thank you and do you have any questions, but this is perhaps the most important one. Musicians do not go and try to get people to appreciate their work. The EARS project started around 2003. I got a good load of money, over 3 or 4 grants from the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, with the idea that we've got some problems with terminology. When I say electroacoustic, an American will say electronic. But if I say electronic, a young person is going to think of something entirely different. And when I say electronic, I actually mean sound synthesis or noise. Oh, that's just one word. Some people are saying acousmatic to mean things that aren't acousmatic these days. So there are 350 or so defined terms, and if we really upgrade it and use AI, I think we'll probably go up to 600 by now. There are 4,000 something bibliographic references that you can get to by using the terms that are in the glossary, and it's in various languages. So it was the go-to place. Many professors hate me for it because the students could find the literature instantly instead of having to learn how to find literature. And I'm really glad I did it. But the next one was the result of the fact that EARS was adopted by UNESCO. You know what UNESCO is. It's the Education, Arts and Science branch of the UN. When I got invited by UNESCO to come to Paris and come and see them and talk about this stuff, and they even gave us a little bit of money, being recognized by UNESCO was as important to me as Dizu playing my piece last night. I mean, oh my God. So they hooked up that site with their DigiArt site. Great initiative, bringing digital arts to anybody. And they told me about one of their initiatives. I'm extending a bit, but it's so interesting. Theme, water. You can do audio art, you can do visual art, and think of water. And then they came up with the obvious example. Think of a kid in Mali, and think of a kid in Bangladesh. One has too little, and one has far too much. What are they going to come up with? And then if they can, communicate through social networks about their experience with water, they're finding digital art, and they're discussing their daily lives. They're linking up people. Oh my God, what a great idea. So this guy, who, by the way, was South African at UNESCO, There was an Argentinian, a Korean, and a South African that were working with me. South African says, "Now, can you make it ears for kids?" How long did it take me to say that? Less than a second. Can you make an ears for kids? It took me 7 years to do that. So that's an e-learning site where there's a section on real world sounds, manipulating sounds, generating sounds, and even one lesson on noise and glitch, aimed at 11 to 14-year-olds, but has been used by 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds. It's in 10 languages, and while we were making this, I got an EU grant to make software, I'm sorry the lassie's not here, called Compose with Sounds, which you download, which is totally intuitive, has very powerful sound manipulation tools. Anybody can use it. It can sequence from the get-go. It's on the national curriculum in Cyprus. Every kid that does music as a subject in secondary will do this. So from getting those stats that 59 to 80% are interested in it, to an e-learning site that can be implemented in schools anywhere on the planet, to being on a national curriculum, we've gone from nobody knows about it to everybody's doing it in Cyprus. That's a nice journey. That's what I've been up to.